As Cliona said, thank you very, very much for coming today. And I think it's very, very important as we start that we remember that every statistic that I'm going to show you, there is a young person behind them. And I started this data collection in May 2018, collected data for 12 months. And I remember the first day, it was a beautiful, sunny, warm May day. And I remember going into a youth club in Dublin and meeting my first three participants and coming out and being absolutely shocked and bowled over by what I'd heard and thinking, my God, you better not be asking these adolescents for this information if you're not going to do something about it. And I think this poem replicates some of the horrific stories that I heard over the data collection time.
I was sexually assaulted when I was 6 years old. Until very recently, I thought nothing of it. Everyone has a weird cousin, right? Crazy inside jokes just between you guys as a family. It happens, everyone. Who was I to know that my experiences were anything more than that? Every secret meeting was backed up with giggles and jokes, touches were tickles, and we were the best of friends. He made me feel special and like I was the best little girl in the world, and I cherished that feeling. I've spent the last decade searching for that feeling, begging to feel wanted, through self-harm, through binge eating, through sex. Yet here we are, basking in an emptiness I've come to accept as a reality. I can remember so vividly the encounters I had with him. Let's go play a game behind the turf shed. So, like a dog, I patted obediently behind him, giggling. I was his favourite, you see, and that's all that mattered. My experience with sexual abuse is something I'm still only coming to terms with, something I want to brush under the rug and forget about again, but I can't. Sexual assault isn't always just touching. It's a memory, a psychological mark that is relentless in its presence. A strange thing I've noticed about myself over the last week or so is how I was so unaware until I wasn't anymore. He never left a mark on my body, he only scarred my mind. It's like I always thought that this scar was a birthmark, and now I can't look at it the same way, and I never will. We all go on a journey of self-acceptance. For some, a brisk stroll through a park, occasionally tarnished by thorns. For others, a boat ride through a storm, each wave of emotion crashing through you on what seems like a never-ending quest for stability. But we all get there in the end. Though each journey is unique, each struggle is different, and each person shrouded in loneliness, none of us are alone. It is not a battle of whose journey is hardest, not a competition of whose scars run deeper or whose sky has the most clouds. It is instead a relentless fight against a common enemy, a revolution against the abuse and the people who take advantage of the children they are trusted with. We as youth are not looking for sympathy, but instead empathy. Do not pity the child who has grown up with thick skin, but instead help her ensure no other child will be forced to grow up too fast the way she was forced to. Native American proverb states, "We do not inherit our earth from our ancestors, we borrow it from our children." Let us make a world we are proud to hand over, a world they will not want to give back.
And on we go to storm and stress. So my PhD looked at the experiences and understanding of adolescents and sexual harassment. And we named the report Storm and Stress because storm and stress is the period in adolescence that Coleman talks about. It's that struggle in adolescence where a child tries to, I suppose, identify themselves, create autonomy and transition from childhood into adulthood. And as we all know, being through it, it often is a time of storm and stress. So the first thing, I suppose, to give you some context before we go into the findings of the study, is I'm going to talk to you about the people that took part in the study. So the adolescent participants, we had 59% that were female and 41% that were male. And I divided the adolescents. The age range was 13 to 17. So obviously, there was a massive stretch. So I divided them into two age groups. So the younger adolescents are 13 to 15-year-old category, and they accounted for 36% of the participants. And then the larger category was 64%, and they were the 16 and 17-year-old adolescents. 13% of the adolescents within the study were LGBTQ, and the other 37% or 87%, sorry, were straight or identified as straight. Again, with the youth workers, 67% of the youth workers, I had 22 youth workers in the study. At that stage, I'd reached data saturation. But to be fair, I suppose it is worth saying that if I kept collecting data, I could have kept going. There was so much interest in adolescents in taking part in this study. They so wanted to have their voices heard. But as I say, with the youth workers, 67 were female and the other 33% were male. And they ranged from 22 to 61 years of age. And 76% of them were between the age group of 20 and 40. 90.5%, gosh, that's an odd figure, isn't it, when you look at it in terms of a whole person, were straight. And the remaining 9.5% were LGBTQ+. So I suppose the best way, what I did with the findings of the study was, when I was considering the lit review for the study, I reviewed an awful lot of frameworks that looked at adolescents and their development and the challenges that they met in that development and what contributed to them. And it became evident that looking at this through an ecological lens, so looking at the individual person, the interpersonal, the relationships that they had, the relationships that they had within community and society, was the best way and the most appropriate way to do this. So from that, I developed an ecological framework, and I presented my findings in two parts. So the first part of this ecological framework is the understanding of the issues that contribute to sexual harassment, and the second part is the recommendations. So how do we respond to adolescent sexual harassment? And we'll get to that as we go along. So it became very apparent as well that sexual harassment has a very, very big relationship to social norms, gender norms, and then that feeds up into policy and practice. And sexual harassment absolutely exists on a continuum. Nobody wakes up one morning and just decides to rape somebody. It starts with milder forms of behavior that escalate over time. And I think that that's very important to consider in terms of adolescence. So I suppose for the first part, before we start looking at the findings, we need to know what is sexual harassment. So what is sexual harassment in terms of what I asked the adolescents in this question, in this study. So there's a broad spectrum of behaviors that can be included in sexual harassment. So the definition that I went with is sexual harassment is unwanted sexual, verbal and non-verbal behaviors which draw on gender-based beliefs and sexist hostility. It can range from unwanted banter, jokes, comments, gestures, and unwelcome sexual advances, unwanted, unwelcome, or uninvited sexual contact. In this report, that means to act up to and include rape. This is a behavior which violates a person's dignity and creates intimidating, hostile, degrading, and an offensive environment. And I suppose it's also really worth considering that when I started out to do this study, to get ethical approval to do it in NUI in Galway, obviously if I said, right, I'm going to ask people about sexual violence, there was absolutely no way that I would have done that ethically or morally, or I don't think I would have got the ethical permission to do it either. So that's why I said, let's look at sexual harassment. let's look at the milder forms of sexual harassment and see what happens. But what actually happened was the adolescents came forward and they told me of experiences that went way beyond catcalling, name calling, and general low-grade harassment. And to be fair, I really think that their voices had to be respected, and that had to be included in this report. So, why is sexual harassment so important? Why do we bother? What's the point? It's the impact. And I suppose within RCNI, we're looking at that every day of the week. And I come from, I'm a counsellor, a psychotherapist, and a clinical supervisor. And I've been working in rape crisis for the last 11 years. And I am so tired of seeing children coming through me, coming through my practice, like the girl in the poem, with their lives utterly destroyed. And you see things like self-harm, panic attacks, eating disorders, problems socializing, academic underperformance. Like sexual harassment impacts every area of an adolescent's life, from long-term to short-term to how they're going to perform for the rest of their lives. It's not just a problem in school. The problems in school result in the underperformance, not realizing their full potential, physically or emotionally or financially. So that's why this study is important. Okay. So why do they perpetrate sexual harassment? What did I find? What type of harmful behaviors present in adolescence? And again, these are on a continuum. Okay, so individually, the skills, the values, and the psychological traits that I found were most prominent in perpetration of sexual violence were the gender and expectations, the personality and character traits that we get as we grow up, the personal values, the knowledge and the moral reasoning, and the self-efficacy. And the moral reasoning and the knowledge, obviously, we get that at home, a lot of it, until we get to the peer stage, where then we're probably more influenced by our peers. Self-esteem and emotional regulation. And then that's at an individual level, but what are our adolescents exposed to environmentally? So what processes or what social predictors are most prominent when we talk about sexual harassment? And again, gender norms are a big part of this. Parental modeling. So what do they get? What do they learn at home? Siblings, family dynamics, the peers that they interact with, popularity among school friends and groups, school itself, the social background where they come from, the culture that they're immersed in, the media exposure that they have, and affiliation to sports groups and other groups and activities. All of these things have a massive impact on sexual harassment and its development and continuum within society. So sexual harassment isn't an individual or an individualized problem or a problem among adolescents. It's a societal problem, and it really needs to be looked at from this point of view, I think. So we'll head into the findings, and these are fairly grim. I'm sorry. So I asked the adolescents, where do they think most sexual harassment happens? 42% are telling me online. We have another 4% that said home. 23% are saying friends, and 12% are saying school. Now, I think it's very important as well that we don't look at any of these figures in absolute isolation, because in terms of friends in school, where do kids mix with their friends is only in school. Pubs and clubs, we're talking 13 to 17-year-olds. 6% said other locations. They could be out walking around in town, they could be in the park. And 3% of adolescents didn't respond. So we definitely have a very, very large online problem. But then I suppose if you couple that with where is it happening? If I'm talking about peer and peer abuse, it's happening with their friends. So you could nearly put the 42 and the 23% together, depending on the way that you want to address this. So I asked the adolescents to rate the levels and types of sexual harassment they had experienced within the last 12 months. And 20% of the adolescents are telling me that they didn't experience any sexual harassment. Now, these are all, everything on this scale is things that they didn't want to see or they didn't want to be exposed to. So sexual jokes and comments, mild sexual jokes and comments that they didn't think were particularly funny, 30% of the adolescents were exposed or had experienced that. Sexting, seeing images or being sent images that they didn't want to see, and that's the most important thing here, is 26% of our adolescents. Physical behaviours, including sexual advances, touching, and various forms of sexual assault, is at 20%. I mean, I've had kids coming up and telling me about being so homophobically bullied in school and harassed that they had to leave. And then we had 3% that what they discussed with me is rape, and aggravated rape in a lot of cases. So I then asked the adolescents, what had they witnessed? So if you haven't experienced sexual violence, have you witnessed it happening among your peer group? And they're nearly a mirror image, the two graphs. And again, this is things that they didn't want to see that has happened within the last 12 months. And in fact, only 17% of adolescents are saying that they haven't witnessed any form of sexual harassment within the last 12 months. Sexual comments and jokes, mild comments and jokes that they didn't think were funny, was 24%. And sexting, seeing images or being sent them, their friends being sent the images, was at 30%. Physical behaviours, including sexual advances, touching, and various forms of assault, 23%. I had one young lady that told me that she had to rescue her friend who was drunk at a house party to stop some boys after they laid her down on the bed and talked to her, taking turns. And I had another boy in another part of the country tell me that they look for the drunkest adolescent in the party and they target her. And again, we're at 5% who have actually seen one of their peers been raped or seriously sexually assaulted. So that's fairly shocking. So I started to dive into the figures then, and I looked at a comparison in younger and older adolescents. And the older adolescents were 2.17 times more likely to report that they had been forced to do something sexual against their will. Older adolescents were 1.83 times more likely to experience inappropriate touch, non-consensual touching. And older adolescents, again, were 1.96 times more likely than younger adolescents to agree that sexual harassment happened in their peer community. And you see one of the comments there from the adolescents. It's just the way it is. Like you could be standing there talking to your friend and some guy will just grab you or whatever. Like you just have to push them off or whatever. So it's kind of accepted. That's just what boys do. Like it's hard because no one's going to do anything. It happens to everyone at least once. Gender. Girls are subjected to much higher levels of sexual harassment than boys. So girls are 2.11 times more likely than boys to report that they experience unwanted sexual comments. They're 2.49 times more likely to experience unwanted sexual touches and 1.92 times more likely to experience online sexual harassment than boys. They're 1.5 times more likely to agree that sexual harassment occurs within their peer community. And boys, on the other hand, are 1.92 times more likely to expose to homophobic name calling than girls. And again, this is one of the participants that I talked to. So he brought me away from the playground where everyone was and he started trying to touch me. I pushed him off and he kept pushing me back. I pushed him away and I started to cry and he was like, your friend told me you wanted to do this. So that to me says an awful lot about education and autonomy. But on we go. Adolescents who are LGBTQ are subjected to much higher levels of sexual harassment than their heterosexual counterparts. So they're 2.95 times more likely to have experienced unwanted sexual comments compared to straight adolescents. They're 1.97 times more likely to be forced into a non-consensual sexual experience than the straight adolescents. And they're 1.99 times more likely to experience inappropriate or unwanted touching. And they're 2.73 times more likely than respondents who had to identify as straight to agree that sexual harassment occurs within their adolescent peer community. Sorry, I'm getting a little bit tongue-tied there. And homophobic name calling is by no means confined to the LGBTQ community. And the use of homophobic slurs against straight adolescents is part of a general homophobic atmosphere that is created and maintained. However, LGBT and adolescents were 11.81 times more likely to have direct experience of being called gay or lesbian in a negative way. 11.81 times. 68% of those who identified as LGBT plus experienced serious sexual harassment, compared with 20% of the whole population in this study. That's absolutely shocking. And again, you see one of the comments there. I think because a lot of my friends being LGBT, it happens a lot more. Like it's almost every one of my close friends has experienced some sort of sexual harassment. So to summarize them, in a 12-month period, 80% of adolescents disclosed being subjected to some form of sexual harassment. 24% of adolescents disclosed that they were subjected to physical or extreme forms of sexual harassment. And 83% of adolescents witnessed some form of sexual harassment. And you know what shocked me was this comment here. I had so many, and this is just one of several. And this isn't a clap on the back for me. This is really, it's shocking. It's always other causes. You never hear of anybody coming up to our age group and looking for our opinion on what you're doing right now. I really appreciate what you're doing. I just wanted to say thank you. I had so many questionnaires. There's 27 questions on the questionnaires that I gave to the 599 adolescents. And I could tell you that there is at least 50 to 60 of those that have thank you written on the end of it. And that's humbling and it's shocking. In a 12-month period, 28% of adolescents witnessed physical or extreme forms of sexual harassment. 78% of adolescents participated that sexual harassment occurred within their community. And our youth workers, 100%, all of the youth workers who participated in the study stated that they had witnessed harassment with levels varying from verbal to extreme forms of sexual harassment. This one youth work participant, I don't think what she said to me, I don't think it'll ever leave my head. And to be honest with you, the language, the way that she was spoke to, this is really dumbed down for PhD. I actually had to cancel 2 groups because of being harassed myself. In the end, it was a decision. I had to say, I'm no longer going to be with this group because of the way I've been treated by these young people. At the time of the group, I was actually pregnant. There was a lot of comments of how often did I have sex to get pregnant? And would I have sex with them? So I was coming into work knowing that I was facing this. And very, very little support for them when they do come into work. In a 12-month period, 57% of the youth workers experienced sexual harassment from an adolescent while they were at work. One of the youth workers who experienced this sexual harassment at work said to me, I felt I had nothing I couldn't give them. I had no positive influence, and that's how I saw it. I had my own limitations because I was female at the time, and I had nothing good to bring to these people. So she actually stopped working. So we move on to looking at my ecological framework. So I've framed what we need to understand from an ecological point of view, looking at the individual or the microsystem. So the individual at the start. What do we need to understand that needs to happen with adolescents that contributes to sexual harassment, I suppose, first. And it's their personal beliefs and their experiences that are shaped by their interpersonal connections. That's where it starts. At an interpersonal level, it includes the beliefs and the systems and experiences of close family, friends, the relationships, and they are again shaped by the interpersonal connections. So families, parents, guardians, carers, friends, all these people that interact. And it's the belief systems and the interactions that happen at this level that are attributed to, I suppose, fueling sexual harassment. And then at a community level, what's happening within community that's contributing to sexual harassment? And it's the belief systems and the youth workers, the educators and the teachers, the lack of education, I could say. I mean, I know that one of the findings that isn't presented here is that 63% of the adolescents said that they would not know how to report sexual harassment if they experienced it in school. A similar number said that they didn't know if their school had a sexual harassment policy, and 36% of the adolescents said that they had received no formal RSE education at all. Social care organisations, community organisations, sports organisations, healthcare professionals, legal professionals. Everything that's happening within these community levels at the moment, an awful lot of the belief systems and the interpersonal connections are contributing to an environment that fosters sexual harassment. And at a societal level, what's happening that's contributing to sexual harassment? The policies that we don't have within our government departments. The policy makers need to look at actually what are the implications of the policies that we have. Mass media and entertainment, what's happening? The influence of porn, internet providers, lawmakers, are our laws fit for purpose? And religious organisations, what type of belief systems are we handing down? And then there's the intergenerational piece. So the intergenerational piece for me is when you take our norms and our practices and our structures and you look at them from what happens from our generation to the next. And in terms of sexual harassment, we're going downhill, I believe. And we really, really need to look at what are we going to do to address this. So there is some good news. Responding to sexual harassment, because they've asked us to and they believe in us. 81% of participants felt that they with the support of their peer group had the power to combat sexual harassment. And with that, and 84% of adolescents in this study felt that they, including their parents, teachers and friends and influential adults, have the power to overcome sexual harassment. So with that now, I'm going to stop sharing and I'm going to hand you over to Tina, who's going to look at what we need to do to combat sexual harassment.